Hey everybody, and welcome to Dear Mr. Potter. I solemnly swear that I am up to no good. I'm Alistair Stevens, and in this, the 10th session of the 3rd season of Dear Mr. Potter, we're moving into our penultimate discussion of Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, in which we will reveal the truth about Scabbers and about Peter Pettigrew. Well, we'll reveal most of the truth about Scabbers and Peter Pettigrew. More on that later. We'll offer just a little more exposition. We'll crash into the final conflicts of civility and savagery and humanity and inhumanity and crime and punishment, of course. And then we will lose our final fight against the Dementors. For now, anyway. I guess it will remain the final fight against the Dementors, but we won't always lose it. More on that next time in our last discussion of the novel. Welcome in particular to Dave and to Mela, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, and to Sharon and to Elizabeth, who are joining us for the first time live, to Angela and Kate and Katie and Ethan and Mickey and Lynn. Guys, it is great to have you all here for this special afternoon recording session of Dear Mr. Potter. Before we get started, though, a quick note, a quick appeal, a quick request. Let me cancel the title slide here so that I can see you all. Because there's a topic that I want to introduce now into our ongoing discourse as a part of Dear Mr. Potter. For those of you who haven't been keeping up with the podcasts, this is now just going to be a regular show. We're just going to cover all of the Harry Potter books. I'm giving up on my willful idea to only cover one of these books a year. We're going to stick with Harry Potter until we're done with the entire run. More on that in the weeks to come. But as a part of that, I want to expand the scope of Dear Mr. Potter just a little bit. I'm very fortunate that podcasting about the stories that I love has become my day job, and I get to spend a lot of time looking critically at the books and the movies which matter most to us. I don't for a moment take that for granted. I'm grateful to everyone who listens to one of my shows, everyone who supports me on Patreon or in other ways. I can only do this because of all of you, and you are all wonderful. As most of you know, I'm passionate about diversity of both voice and representation, inclusivity of voice and representation, and about the discussion of responsible and progressive social politics in fiction. We write stories. That is one of the things that human beings do, but in many ways, our stories also write us. They define the bounds of our society. They define the shape of our society. And questioning endemic and systematic misogyny and the culture of rape and sexual assault, homophobia, racism, the list depressingly goes on and on and on. Questioning these things is an essential part, I think, of the critical analysis of stories. We cannot divorce stories from our shared culture, and nor should we. To respond to a problematic element in a story that we love with a trite, hey, it's only a story response, displays, I think, a profound misunderstanding of what stories are and why they matter so much. So on the one hand, I'm lucky enough to have a platform from which I can speak. I have a soapbox and a microphone and an audience, and I'm grateful every day that I get to have these discussions. But on the other hand, well, I don't mean to shock and alarm anyone, but I am a heterosexual cisgendered white guy, which means, I think, that there is a limit to how powerfully and intimately and authentically I can address and explore issues which I truly believe to be genuinely important, extraordinarily important, and points of immediate and terrible social and political conflict. So here's my thought, here's my idea, and I'm hoping that you guys are going to help me kind of work through this idea and expand the platform just a little bit. I would like to open up the platform that I have at Point North Media. That's Dear Mr. Potter and Story and Star Wars and There and Back Again, as well as the other shows that I may do in the future. I want to open up that platform to people who are oftentimes underrepresented in academic and critical discourse. I want to hear very much the voices of women, the voices of people of color, of people of other gender identities and sexualities. I want to hear those voices talking about the stories which mean the most to them, both talking about the stories themselves and also talking about the cultural and personal impact of those stories. It isn't enough now in 2017 to talk about diversity and representation. It isn't enough now for me, in my privileged position, to talk about diversity and representation. We must endeavor to foster diversity and representation by making safe and positive and accessible and significant spaces. And that is something that I eagerly want to do with your help. So I'm not sure about the best way to pursue this goal. I don't certainly want to define it from the jump and inadvertently go down a road that isn't the best road for us to go down together. My first thought is to have a roundtable discussion about Prisoner of Azkaban after the discussion of the novel is over, a cap on this season of Dear Mr. Potter. I might run that show and then put it out in the regular DMP feed, or I might step back from the mic entirely, yield the space to other voices, which I think would be a valuable thing to do. One-on-one interview discussions may be good, or the roundtable format might work better, or short prepared audio essays might be an interesting thing to do, some combination of all of those things. I am not sure how to proceed best, but I do believe that this is something that is very important. So if you are interested in offering your perspective on Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, and you belong to one or more of those underrepresented groups, underrepresented in areas of academic and critical discourse, basically, if you love Harry Potter but don't look like Harry Potter, then I'd love for you to get in touch and to let me know the best way to approach this. You can email me directly, pointnorthmedia@gmail.com, and we will figure out some way of offering this platform up to other voices, to expanding the scope of the discourse so that we can be more inclusive and consider this spectacular novel, this spectacular series from more than one limited perspective. This isn't going to change the bulk of what I do at Point North Media. It's still going to be me talking a lot about stories, of course, but in addition to those discussions, I'd like to invite some of you who are joining me live here today and some of you who are listening to the podcast after the fact to talk about Harry Potter, to talk about the stories that you love and what they mean to you personally, particularly with regard to your personal identity. I think that would be a really fascinating and valuable conversation. And there is an age-old aphorism with regard to the internet. If you want something from the internet, the best way to get that thing is simply to make it, simply to cause it to happen. So we're going to move in that direction. And if you have ideas about the best way to approach that, get in touch. Email me at pointnorthmedia@gmail.com. Let's move into our discussion then, because we've got quite a lot to get through. This is a pretty important reading this week. We've got a lot of exposition. We get a final reckoning of sorts with Sirius Black. At least we get a greater understanding of Sirius Black. And then we're going to move into what is, for me, the most charged and emotive conflict in the entire book, and up there, honestly. This is maybe one of the top 3 sequences that we're going to get in the entire series of Harry Potter. Harry against the Dementors by the side of the lake is enormously powerful. We're going to talk about that as we get to it. Let me, oh, Fina is joining us. Excellent. That's good. I'm so glad. I'm so glad. Excellent. Oh, and Mickey says, I have a sister in grad school for queer theory and literature who would love to speak to you, Alistair. She's a big fan. Great. Get in touch. Yes. Email pointnorthmedia@gmail.com. Excellent. Okay. Let's move straight into this and get started. As I say, a lot of material to cover. Let me call up this first slide. This is the beginning of our chapter, The Servant of Lord Voldemort, chapter 19 of Prisoner of Azkaban. Hermione screamed. Black leapt to his feet. Harry felt as though he'd received a huge electric shock. I found this at the base of the Whomping Willow, said Snape, throwing the cloak aside, careful to keep this wand pointing directly at Lupin's chest. Very useful, Potter, I thank you. Snape was slightly breathless, but his face was full of suppressed triumph. You're wondering, perhaps, how I knew you were here, he said, his eyes glittering. I'd just been to your office, Lupin. You forgot to take your potion tonight, so I took a goblet full along, and very lucky I did. Lucky for me, I mean. Lying on your desk was a certain map. One glance at it told me all I needed to know. I saw you running along this passageway and out of sight. Severus, Lupin began, but Snape overrode him. I've told the headmaster again and again that you're helping your old friend Black into the castle, Lupin, and here's the proof. Not even I dreamed you would have the nerve to use this old place as your hideout. Severus, you're making a mistake, said Lupin urgently. You haven't heard everything. I can explain. Sirius is not here to kill Harry. 2 more for Azkaban tonight, said Snape, his eyes now gleaming fanatically. I should be interested to see how Dumbledore takes this. He was quite convinced you were harmless, you know, Lupin, a tame werewolf. You fool, said Lupin softly. Is a schoolboy grudge worth putting an innocent man back inside Azkaban? Bang! Thin, snake-like cords burst from the end of Snape's wand and twisted themselves around Lupin's mouth, wrists, and ankles. He overbalanced and fell to the floor, unable to move. With a roar of rage, Black started towards Snape, but Snape pointed his wand straight between Black's eyes. Give me a reason, he whispered. Give me a reason to do it, and I swear I will. A schoolboy grudge here, defining our final conflict in the pages of Harry Potter, or giving a shape to this emerging final conflict in the pages of Harry Potter, as of course it was always going to. One of the most interesting elements of Prisoner of Azkaban, and it's an element that I think is kept in the periphery as we're discussing the bulk of the book, is that Harry and Ron and Hermione are once again inheriting a problem not of their own making. And this is a powerful element of Harry Potter that I think often goes unremarked upon. Harry is not responsible for Voldemort. Harry is not responsible specifically for the Philosopher's Stone, or for the Chamber of Secrets. And now he's not responsible for, well, any of this. He is inheriting in a very real sense, and now more powerfully than ever, he is paying for the sins of the father here. Here he is inheriting a problem that has been festering within wizarding society in general for a generation. Harry is going to have to respond and push back against something that is not of his own making. And in this plot, at least, something that isn't even specifically targeted at him. Snape is acting in part because of the grudge that has defined his response to Hogwarts, at least for much of his career. I think we can begin to get a sense now of Snape's antagonistic and yet essential, his necessary relationship with Hogwarts at this point. That is a complicated thing, which is going to continue to be subtly developed and textured as we move through the rest of the books in the series. But already we get a sense that Snape is defined by these childhood experiences. We don't know the details of all of that yet. It's not new either, of course. We must remember that long epilogue scene at the end of the first book, where Dumbledore, among other things, gives an accounting of Snape's actions. Why did Snape work so hard to protect Harry? Well, to pay off a debt, to pay off an unforgivable debt, because James Potter did the one thing that he could never forgive. James Potter saved Severus Snape's life. And we're going to continue to watch Snape's actions as we move through these pages. So Snape taking the draft of Wolfsbane potion to Lupin's office, which Lupin crucially has not taken. Let's put a pin in that. We'll circle back to that in a few pages. Snape taking that potion to Lupin's office, apparently sincerely, apparently whatever injunction is placed upon Snape with regard to Lupin and the Wolfsbane potion is still in powerful effect. Apparently whatever demand it was, however it was that Dumbledore framed this demand upon Snape, it is still effective. We have no reason, I believe, to suspect that Snape is not sincere when he says that he was simply taking the potion to Lupin's office. But there, what does he find? The Marauder's map. If only Lupin had sealed the map, closed the map, wiped the map, as is so trivially done, then Snape would never have discovered what was happening. And even arguably, if Snape hadn't found the invisibility cloak outside by the Whomping Willow, then he wouldn't have been able to sneak in. We would have had some advance warning, at least, even if he had then braved the tunnel to the Shrieking Shack. And what is happening here, in part, I think, is that we are seeing not just all of our subplots collide. I mentioned this a little last week as we moved toward the climax. Every single prominent subplot of this book is now in play, whether it's the Invisibility Cloak or the Whomping Willow or the Shrieking Shack or Scabbers/Peter or Remus Lupin or Sirius Black. You know, all of these elements are now in play. Even that core friendship between Hermione, Ron, and Harry is now in play as well. All of these subplots are crashing into each other, and they will all play a part in our... Well, okay, I guess the only one that isn't so far is Hermione's primary subplot, the Time Turner subplot, which we will get to next week. That will be our loophole. That will be our escape mechanism that allows us to get out of this awful conflict and restore some sense of justice. But everything is now in play, and the stakes have arguably never been higher. And that's a little difficult because, I mean, there is an argument that says, okay, what is the worst thing that happens to Harry as a result of the events here in the Shrieking Shack? If things go terribly, what happens to Harry? And the answer is, I mean, in some senses, not much, right? His life is not being threatened. His personhood is not really being threatened here. This is not, at this point at least, a fight to the death the way that it was. We're going to introduce some more elements, some more potentially problematic elements in the course of this sequence that could lead to more immediate repercussions for Harry and for Hermione and for Ron, but we're not there yet. So what is it that Harry is fighting for? What is it that matters so much here? Well, it's justice. I mean, it's truth in a sense, because the truth has been occluded, because the truth has been shrouded, and we're working to uncover what is really happening. But what is motivating Harry through the back half of this book, and what is really defining Harry's actions as we move into the climax, is a desire for justice. Justice for his parents, yes, revenge and vengeance, yes, but also a kind of abstract justice. Here, Harry is doing the only thing that a character like Harry Potter can do when faced with the systematic dissembly of these legalistic structures that surround the wizarding world. He's taking matters into his own hands. He's acting personally and primarily to restore justice. So let's see how that plays out. Good. Let me see. Oh, this is interesting from Ryan. Are we to assume missing one dose of the Wolfsbane potion negates the effect of taking other doses? Lupin mentions that he has to take it for the week preceding the full moon, so presumably he's taken several doses already. We can only speculate, I guess, that's yes. I mean, everything in the book suggests that that is in fact the case. Either he has been negligent taking the potion up to this point, or yes, missing one dose is in fact enough, which I think actually it makes more sense, right? It works a little better if the fragility of Lupin's setup at Hogwarts is this vulnerable. That missing one dose and missing it simply by a couple of hours is sufficient. Certainly Snape makes no suggestion here that he was concerned that Lupin had already turned into a werewolf, despite the fact that tonight is the night of the full moon, right? He goes to the office with the potion. Hey, you can take this, it'll be fine. So there is a window where he can continue to take the Wolfsbane potion and will not turn, but failing to take the potion in that window apparently does have dire and disastrous consequences, which means that Lupin's decision to run out of his office on the spur of the moment, his decision to cast himself into adversity to try and save Harry actually makes a lot of sense. He's just not thinking about the Wolfsbane potion right now. He's not thinking about this one very important thing that he has to do. He's engaged more in the unfolding drama, which is perhaps a little more forgivable here. Yes, a lot of agreement here in the Crowdcast chat with that. That's good. Good. Okay. C-Star says, too bad Lupin didn't make the map go blank. Wow. Yes. I mean, yes, that's tough, right? I mean, if he'd just done that, things would have turned out very differently, or perhaps not turned out very differently at all. We'll see how we get to all of that in due course. Kim asks, have we found a parallel between menstrual cycles and werewolf cycles? Well, that's, I mean, a parallel that is as old as the werewolf legend itself. The connection between blood and bestiality and the full moon. Yes, I mean, that goes back to medieval understandings of menstrual cycles and things of that ilk. And when I say bestial there, that is obviously with huge air quotes around it, the version of menstrual myth, if you like, that is presented by and kind of codified by a patriarchal culture. Yeah, I mean, we're drawing a direct connection there. And of course, connections too between the bestial aspects of lycanthropes and sex and sexuality. Yes, all of that is wrapped up here too. Downplayed in Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, thankfully, but still present in the broader myth. Yes. As Angela says, going all the way back to Little Red Riding Hood. Yes, that's good. That's good. Okay, so this is our setup here. We have Snape hitting Lupin with this spell that binds him, which is enormously powerful and removes Lupin from the immediate consequences of the scene. And then we get into Snape, ranting a little bit. Black, stop dead. It would have been impossible to say which face showed more hatred. Harry stood there, paralyzed, not knowing what to do or whom to believe. He glanced around at Ron and Hermione. Ron looked just as confused as he did, still fighting to keep hold on the struggling Scabbers. Hermione, however, took an uncertain step towards Snape and said in a very breathless voice, Professor Snape, it wouldn't hurt to hear what they've got to say, would it? Miss Granger, you are already facing suspension from this school, Snape spat. You, Potter and Weasley, are out of bounds in the company of a convicted murderer and a werewolf. For once in your life, hold your tongue. But if there was a mistake, keep quiet, you stupid girl, Snape shouted, looking suddenly quite deranged. Don't talk about what you don't understand. A few sparks shot out of the end of his wand, which was still pointed at Black's face. Hermione fell silent. Vengeance is very sweet, Snape breathed at Black. How I hoped I would be the one to catch you. The joke's on you again, Severus, Black snarled. As long as this boy brings his rat up to the castle, he jerked his head at Ron. I'll come quietly. Up to the castle, said Snape silkily. I don't think we need to go that far. All we have to do is call the Dementors once we get out of the willow. They'll be very pleased to see you, Black. Pleased enough to give you a little kiss, I dare say. What little color there was in Black's face left it. A couple of powerful moments here from Severus Snape, and a really strong indication that our speculation about the nature of wild magic throughout the course of this book is, in fact, correct. We get the exchange with Hermione, and first of all, Hermione displaying enormous courage. Hermione displaying her Gryffindor colors for once rather than her Ravenclaw colors, but even in this moment, taking the Ravenclaw approach. Hey, if we can all just be rational, if we can all just talk and learn the facts, then we'll have the truth, and the truth has to be worth something. That's a very Ravenclaw perspective on this entire circumstance. Connecting back, of course, to Hermione's actions to try to defend Buckbeak from the charges levied against him. But Snape is, well, deranged, right? Keep quiet, you stupid girl, Snape shouted, looking suddenly quite deranged. Don't talk about what you don't understand. A few sparks shot out the end of his wand, which was still pointed at Black's face. Those few sparks, indicative absolutely, I think, of this kind of wild magic. We were just talking about sparks emerging from the end of a wand in a moment of heightened tension, heightened conflict in last week's reading, you know? I think that this is another element, another piece of evidence supporting our idea that magic can simply be spontaneous. It can be generated. It can be, you know, immediate in moments of heightened emotional drama. So also, parenthetically, Snape calling Hermione, you stupid girl. One of the worst moments from Severus Snape, you guys. A moment that genuinely raises my hackles and infuriates me here as I'm reading it. Yes. Snape has lost all reason, it says. Snape has lost all reason, it seems, says Lizzie here in the chat. Yeah. I mean, he seems to be deranged. We're dealing with the consequence of this schoolboy grudge, as Lupin calls it. And we kind of have a sense of why it is that Snape is feeling this way. You know, we are allowed, I think we are permitted, if not in this scene, outright encouraged to have a certain empathy for Severus Snape. He has been bullied and persecuted and endangered by these men, by these people. And now, again, there is a kind of justice here, right? As he says, Miss Granger, you are already facing suspension from the school, Snape spat. You, Potter, and Weasley are out of bounds. Okay, strike 1, you are out of bounds. Strike 2, in the company of a convicted murderer. Strike 3, and a werewolf. These things are antithetical to an ordered society. I mean, literally antithetical. Okay, the bound of the ordered society, well, Harry and Ron and Hermione are literally out of bounds at this point. They have broken the rules and left behind the bounds of that civilized and ordered society, what Hogwarts represents itself as and purports itself to be. Now you're in the company of a convicted murderer. The line that is crossed by the murderer is a civil, social, legalistic line. Sirius Black has been convicted. That makes him innately dangerous because to a mind like Severus Snape's, society cannot be wrong in that way. You know, there's no such thing, I suppose, as an indefensible conviction in the mind of Severus Snape. Certainly, this goes back all the way to the beginning of the first book. Remember, our first run-in with Severus Snape in the very first potions class that Harry ever takes involves him taking points from Gryffindor in a completely unjust and self-indulgent fashion. He is a tyrant of his classroom and representative of tyranny in general. So Harry, Ron, and Hermione have broken the rules. That's strike 1. They're consorting with someone who has broken the rules of society. That's strike 2. And consorting with someone who has broken the rules of humanity. They're consorting with a werewolf. And it doesn't matter what or who Remus Lupin really is. What matters is that he is not of the Wizarding Society. That is what seems to be the definitive strike against him from the perspective of Severus Snape. So here he is infuriated. And even when Sirius, and I can't believe for a moment that Sirius would actually go along with this. I can't believe for a moment that this is actually, you know, that he's actually sincere here. The joke's on you, Severus Black snarled. As long as the boy brings his rat up to the castle, he jerked his head at Ron, I'll come quietly. What does he think is going to happen at the castle? Does he think that he's going to be handed over to Dumbledore? Does he expect Dumbledore to believe him? Does he expect Dumbledore to pursue justice and therefore it doesn't matter what happens to Sirius Black? Sirius Black's perspective on Dumbledore within the pages of this book is fascinating in its absence. We just don't get a strong sense of how those two men personally connect with each other, and I would love more of that. I would love a stronger sense of how Sirius post-conviction, looks at Hogwarts, looks at Dumbledore, looks at the structures of the wizarding world. But of course, Snape doesn't need to resort to temporal authority because he can resort to absolute authority. He's not now a representative of Hogwarts, and it's interesting that we're not within the bounds of Hogwarts at this point. He doesn't need to appeal to the rules or to appeal to Dumbledore at this point. He can go straight to the Dementors. This is not Hogwarts, but it is the wizarding world. And that means, Sirius Black, you're in the adult world now. That means that you have to deal with the adult consequences of your actions. This is not about points being taken from your house. This is not about detention in the Forbidden Forest. This is now the kiss of the Dementor. And of course, we've foreshadowed the kiss of the Dementor previously in the book. And we're really doing a great job here, I think, of foreshadowing it specifically, but also highlighting the incongruity of the kiss as the ultimate punishment. You know, we're talking about the loss of self. Yes, as Lupin described to Harry earlier, you know, they will drain you of those things which are definitively you. This is death. I mean, this is a kind of death of personhood, death of selfhood, but it takes the form of this enormously intimate kiss, you know, this gesture which we usually associate with the affirmation of life and the affirmation of personhood. Not so when you're dealing with the Dementors. Lynn says here, oh, Joseph, we're going to circle back around to your point in just a moment. But Lynn says first, I don't understand why Sirius doesn't hate Dumbles because he didn't get a trial after all because of him. Why should he trust him now? This is an excellent question. Why should he? But he seems to, or are we supposed to believe that this is just a gambit, that this is a ploy from Sirius Black? Hey, okay, I'll come quietly. You can let Lupin up. Everything is going to be fine. Sirius doesn't seem to be concerned about the fact that Lupin hasn't taken his Wolfsbane potion. We're not apparently going to be aware of that until it becomes immediately concerning. Possible it's just a play from Sirius Black. Yes, okay, you've got me. Good job, Severus Snape. Everyone is going to hail you as the conquering hero. Everyone is going to hail you as the tool of justice. Just take me back to the castle. That's fine. Just take me back to Hogwarts and all will be well. The two possible explanations, one that he believes that things actually will be okay if they go back to the castle. Well, okay, three explanations, right? The first, everything is going to be fine if we go back to Hogwarts, showing that Sirius Black has a faith in Hogwarts as an institution and presumably Dumbledore as a man. Second option, doesn't matter what happens to Sirius Black as long as the truth about Peter Pettigrew is revealed. If they go back to the castle, he will get the opportunity to tell his story, and then he believes that justice will out. Not justice in a personal sense. He will not be, you know, redeemed, and yes, he will probably be handed over to the Dementors and sent back to Azkaban, and that's just fine as far as Sirius Black is concerned, but it doesn't matter because the truth about Peter Pettigrew will be revealed. Possibly. Third, yeah, let's go back to the castle. Why don't you go first through the dark tunnel and I'll just walk along here. Just give me an opportunity. Just give me a second and I will animagus myself into my dog form and tear you apart, Severus Snape. Is he just playing for time here, or is this an indication that he still believes in these structures of justice? Xandris is joining us and Ethan is offering a quick catch up. To catch you up, one, Snape is the worst. There, you're all caught up. Fair. Absolutely fair, actually. Yeah, that's a pretty clean encapsulation of what we're doing here. Yes, Katie's asking, is Sirius just making sure that Peter is found? That's certainly one perspective here. Yes, that's one explanation for his actions here. Mela says, I think Sirius has long given up on his claim on life. As long as Pettigrew is held to account, I don't think he cares about himself. And Joseph says, there's no mention of a death penalty in the Ministry justice system, implying that while the kiss is a moral punishment under some circumstances, death is not. This seems to put the Ministry in the death is the worst thing there is camp, always a bad position to stake out in Harry Potter. Joseph, that is so right. That is such a smart insight, right? That using the Dementor's kiss as the ultimate punishment, within, you know, as ordained by the Ministry, is kind of disingenuous, but also representative of a philosophically false position within the world of Harry Potter, a philosophically false position which will carry a great deal of weight as we move forward through the other books, namely that death is the worst thing that there is. Yes, you're right. If they are, and we don't get a definitive, you know, exposition on this, we don't get, this is never made explicit. We don't have a beat from Cornelius Fudge where he says, well, yes, of course, we use the kiss of the Dementor to punish wrongdoers, but at least we don't kill them. I mean, that is implied, but not explicit. But in the implication, there is both the understanding that the ministry seems to be ducking the moral consequence or the moral weight of this death of selfhood, death of personhood, and kind of falsely equivocating that with imprisonment versus, preserving the life above all other things, preserving the life of the convicted criminal, even if the essence of the convicted criminal, the self of the convicted criminal is actually taken away, is actually yielded up to the Dementors. Yeah, good. Okay, let me catch up, make sure we're here. Oh my gosh, Kim asks a question here, which honestly could lead to a podcast all its own. Do wizards believe in reincarnation? That way losing your soul would be a horrible punishment. I can't think off the top of my head of any example of a wizard talking about reincarnation at all within the pages of Harry Potter. Not reincarnation in the traditional sense. I mean, I suppose that's kind of the preservation of fragments of soul after death is going to be very significant. It is already very significant. We just don't know it yet, but will be very significant later in the series. But actual, reincarnation in the traditional sense, I can't think of an example of that. I can't think of a discussion of that within the entire series. But that's a fascinating question, right? And that adds an even greater weight to the idea that the removal of the soul is even more powerful. The removal of self, of personhood, is even more powerful than the removal of life, because that is a crime not just against the body, not just against the individual, but about a crime against the immortal soul. And to expand that still further, do wizards believe in an afterlife? Do wizards believe in heaven? I mean, there are a lot of questions about death that we'll get an opportunity to talk about later. Yeah, good. Jin Fizz is joining us. Excellent. Good to have you all here with us. And Disney DYL is joining us for the first time too. This is great. Guys, thank you so much for being here. I do love these afternoon sessions. I love having you all here with me. Good. Okay, let's keep going on because, gosh, I've still got so many slides today. And here we get to the power of three, I suppose. Here our power trio takes united action and we see what they are capable of doing. Professor Lupin could have killed me about 100 times this year, Harry said. I've been alone with him loads of times, having defense lessons against the Dementors. If he was helping Black, why didn't he just finish me off then? Don't ask me to fathom the way a werewolf's mind works, hissed Snape. Get out of the way, Potter. You're pathetic, Harry yelled. Just because they made a fool of you at school, you won't even listen. Silence! I will not be spoken to like that, Snape shrieked, looking madder than ever. Like father, like son, Potter. I've just saved your neck. You should be thanking me on bended knee. You would have been well served if he'd killed you. You'd have died like your father, too arrogant to believe you might be mistaken in Black. Now get out of the way or I will make you. Get out of the way, Potter! Harry made up his mind in a split second. Before Snape could take even one step toward him, he had raised his wand. Expelliarmus! He yelled. Except that his wasn't the only voice that shouted. There was a blast that made the door rattle on its hinges. Snape was lifted off his feet and slammed into the wall, then slid down it to the floor, a trickle of blood oozing from under his hair. He had been knocked out. Harry looked around. Both Ron and Hermione had tried to disarm Snape at exactly the same moment. Snape's wand soared in a high arc and landed on the bed next to Crookshanks. You shouldn't have done that, said Black, looking at Harry. You should have left him to me. Harry avoided Black's eyes. He wasn't sure, even now, that he'd done the right thing. Unsure that he had done the right thing, Harry still takes action, or I guess to properly tense that, unsure that he is doing the right thing, Harry still takes action. And of course, Harry's the hero, and taking action is pretty much what he does, and kind of by definition, taking action for Harry is always the right thing in an, Aristotelian virtue ethicist sense, right? Like, to take action is the greatest virtue possessed by a Harry Potter, therefore taking action is always going to be good, or at least taking action is always going to be better than the alternative. Let's, just acknowledge that and move right on past it. A philosophical read of Harry Potter will not do anything to get us through the rest of the slides here in today's session, but it is something that we'll probably talk about in the very near future, particularly by the time we get to Goblet of Fire, of course. This function of Expelliarmus I find completely fascinating because, again, I don't think that we've had a sense of spellcasting working like this. Expelliarmus has been used, God, I don't know, a dozen times, possibly more than a dozen times in the books so far. We use it all the time. It is the default go-to weapon whenever two wizards are facing off against each other. Expelliarmus, you disarm your opponent and thereby render them incapable of taking action against you. Again, with our discussions of wild magic, possibly not completely incapable of taking action against you, but nonetheless. So far, it has worked pretty much 100% of the time, which is great. But here we see an evolution of Expelliarmus. Expelliarmus is not a fairy magic, remove the wand from the hand of the person using it spell. It is a spell that appears to detonate some kind of concussive force, right? If Expelliarmus were simply a disarming spell, if that were all that Expelliarmus was, then what would be the effect of 3 people casting it at once? Well, presumably Snape's wand would fly 3 times further away, right? Or not at all. That in fact, the spell itself would have the same singular effect no matter how many people are casting it, right? But here we see something very different. The concussive force of Expelliarmus, the kind of raw magic edge of Expelliarmus, the mechanism by which this cleaned and distilled and codified spell manages to accomplish its goal, the way in which Expelliarmus fulfills its own primary function is expanded, is exaggerated, and knocks Snape backward. I love this. Again, all of the uses of magic that we get in the pages of Prisoner of Azkaban, I think, really indicate a greater understanding of what magic is. And okay, when I say what magic is, I guess there are 2 different approaches to that, right? What magic is within the bounds of this fictional world? What are spells when you go to Hogwarts? What is Harry like actually learning? Is he learning a neat little cantrip that will remove the wand from someone's hand? This is a very specific one-purpose kind of spell. Or is he learning to manipulate, the elemental forces of the universe? Well, it's pretty clear by this point that it is the latter. It's pretty clear that we are engaging with more direct applications of force than we've suspected. Expelliarmus up until this point has been presented to us at least as a fairly harmless spell, and yet here it is yielding this concussive force, which is surprising and powerful. At the same time, we're also developing our understanding of how magic works within the bounds of the narrative. J.K. Rowling seems to be stepping back from the idea that magic is neat and ordered and simple, that it is distilled and made scientific in exactly the way that we've discussed previously on Dear Mr. Potter. This is not a politely remove the wand from the hand of an opponent spell. It's something far more narratively powerful, narratively punchy than that. And that's a strong choice at this point. And that connected with the wild magic sparks and with the unexpected consequences of magics, going all the way back to the inflation of Harry's aunt right at the beginning of this book, right? We've seen examples of this throughout the series. Yes, the disappearing glass with the snake right at the beginning of the first book, so on and so forth. Harry leaping to the top of the building in the first book. Yeah, there are a number of examples of this, but they are now in focus as we move through Prisoner of Azkaban in a way that they haven't been before. Not cantrips. Jen Fizz is correcting me. Not cantrips. No, you're right. You're right. Not technically a cantrip. I was looking for a synonym and couldn't quite find it. So in the broadest sense, a cantrip, a magical spell. Yes, but you're right. I should respect more the internal logic and consistency of the use of magic here. Yeah. Good. Wow, a lot of chat in the Crowdcast chat today. It's really moving along. Okay. Yes. Oh, Joseph says the Hufflepuff version of Expelliarmus, asking politely for the other's wand. Oh, and the Ravenclaw version of Expelliarmus would be reasoning why you should put down your wand, right? You shouldn't be holding that, and let me tell you why. Let me Ravensplain your need to put down your wand. Ethan says, I've always viewed spells as being ways to control and direct magic in a certain way. Theoretically, you can perform any act without any incantation or wand magic, but they help focus your magic, if you will. That, I think, is where we've come to, Ethan. Yes, I think you're absolutely right. At this point, I think it is fair to say that a wizard of sufficient power could cast any spell without, could cast any spell, quote unquote, cast a spell, could cause any magical effect without using a wand and without, offering an incantation. That a sufficiently powerful wizard, and I will say too, we don't see a wizard this powerful in the entire series, but theoretically, at least, the wand is a focusing mechanism, as is the incantation. And I think that it's therefore entirely appropriate that this is Harry's perspective on magic. When you learn to do something, if you learn to play a musical instrument, or you learn to paint, or you learn to sculpt, any kind of art, and we've discussed the ways in which magic is at least as much art as it is science in the world of J.K. Rowling. when you begin any kind of art, you learn the formal forms. You learn how to do the thing. This is how you play a D chord on a guitar, or this is how you play a particular scale on a piano. But then when you have mastered that, you can move beyond those forms and begin, well, what is the metaphor? Composing, playing jazz? I mean, you can begin expressing yourself more natively in that form, and that's a powerful thing too. Or if you prefer, we learn the structures of language. You know, we learn the vocabulary and the syntax and the grammar of language as children, but then when you are a mature adult and you are hired to write a show like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, then you get to just throw out the rule book and you get to redefine language on the fly, not because the rules no longer apply to you, but because you have so thoroughly mastered and internalized those rules that you can parley them without necessarily obeying them. You can raise their kind of operative functionality at that point. So yeah, I'm inclined to agree. Exactly. Yes. Let me see here. Disney DYL, Disney Dill. I'm not sure how to pronounce your name aloud. I'm not sure how that works, but I'll say Disney DYL for now. I don't remember if this shows up in Harry Potter or another magical series, but my understanding was that all spells could potentially be done without wand or incantation, but doing so without being an experienced and skilled wizard could be catastrophic or fatal. That is an element in other magic systems, certainly. And yes, the focal mechanism of the wand, the ubiquity of the wand in Harry Potter suggests, yes, that it orders and formalizes magic in a really interesting way. But yes, potentially. Good. Yes, and Elizabeth here is calling out David Eddings. Yes. Disney Dill, phonetically. Excellent. Thank you so much, Disney Dill. I appreciate that. Okay. Let's keep going on. So this is our Expelliarmus ×3. This gets us this gets rid of Snape, and then we can move into the final reveal. And this kind of takes really three forms here. We'll begin with why Sirius Black escaped Azkaban. Black put one of his claw-like hands inside his robes and took out a crumpled piece of paper, which he smoothed flat and held out to show the others. It was the photograph of Ron and his family that appeared in the Daily Prophet the previous summer, and there on Ron's shoulder was Scabbers. "How did you get this?" Lupin asked Black, thunderstruck. "Fudge," said Black. "When he came to inspect Azkaban last year, he gave me his paper, and there was Peter on the front page on this boy's shoulder. I knew him at once. How many times had I seen him transform? And the caption said the boy would be going back to Hogwarts, to where Harry was." "My God," said Lupin softly, staring from Scabbers to the picture in the paper and back again. "His front paw." "What about it?" said Ron defiantly. "He's got a toe missing," said Black. "Of course," Lupin breathed. "So simple, so brilliant. He cut it off himself." "Just before he transformed," said Black. "When I cornered him, he yelled for the whole street to hear that I'd betrayed Lily and James. Then before I could curse him, he blew apart the street with the wand behind his back, killed everyone within 20 feet of himself, and sped down into the sewer with the other rats." "Didn't you ever hear, Ron?" said Lupin. "The biggest part of Peter they found was his finger. Look, Scabbers probably had a fight with another rat or something. He's been in my family for ages, right?" 12 years, in fact," said Lupin. "Didn't you ever wonder why he was living so long?" We've been taking good care of him," said Ron. "Not looking too good at the moment, though, is he?" said Lupin. "I guess he's been losing weight ever since he heard Sirius was on the loose again." This is brilliant. This is a great bit of plot construction, and a surprisingly sophisticated bit of plot construction if you follow J.K. Rowling through the first two books in the series. I've been talking about the ways in which all of our subplots crash into our climax, and that is an interesting thing to observe, right? As a reader of the novel, that is an interesting thing to note. It is certainly compelling, and the accounts that I've gotten from many of you about your first time reading this book in particular, there is a recurring beat where, yeah, I don't know, I was kind of losing interest, but then the Shrieking Shack, and I was in. That was it. As soon as I hit that point, I stayed up all night to finish the book. I read late to finish the book. Like from that point on, I was compelled through it. And that's a consequence of this structure, and we can appreciate that as readers. But we can also appreciate that as fans and appreciators of the narrative craft. J.K. Rowling's narrative craft in this novel is an order of magnitude tighter than anything we've seen in the first two books. The organization and the ordering of this plot is surprisingly subtle and sophisticated. There are very few elements in this book which are either left fallow for too long or artificially inflated or conflated, or which appear out of nowhere at the end of the novel as a deus ex machina. We don't get that, really. There's very little conspicuous foreshadowing through this book. It is just a very well-constructed, very, very well-ordered plot. I want to scroll back here to Yes, I wanted to scroll back here to this comment from Karen in the Crowdcast chat. Language is a perfect analogy because the capacity for it is inborn, and then students learn a codified form, and then the really accomplished and talented can go in previously unexplored directions. That's beautiful. Yes, that's a great encapsulation of what I was aiming toward, but not quite hitting. Good. Lynn says, too, Hogwarts is also self-regulating how people perceive their ability to perform magic. Who knows that a different teaching method wouldn't yield different results, What about the goblins and the house elves? They don't need wands. Absolutely right. They don't need wands, and we're going to have the chance to talk about house elves in the next book. And this, again, just a different perspective on magic, right? This is like learning music by going to a classical conservatory. This is like learning about all art by learning how to paint a watercolor. This is a completely legitimate perspective, but it's not perhaps the only perspective. And it's interesting ultimately that the dominant codifying force in wizard society, the dominant codifying force in magical culture, will be so rigorous and so relatively scientific, so relatively mundane. Because, of course, while the wizards are magical, as opposed to muggles, wizards are nothing like as magical as gnomes or house elves or centaurs or other creatures. There are other creatures in this world that wield magic much more naturally, much more intuitively, perhaps, than wizards. And yet, wizards, we think of it as the wizarding world. We don't even think of it necessarily as the magical world. Yeah, good. Okay, so we get the reveal here of Peter Pettigrew. We get the reveal of the missing toe. We get the account from Black. When I cornered him, he yelled for the whole street to hear that I'd betrayed Lily and James. Then before I could curse him, let's just, pin in that for the next book's discussion. Before I could curse him, he blew apart the street with the wand behind his back, killed everyone within 20 feet of himself, and sped down into the sewer with the other rats. The biggest bit of Peter they found, says Lupin, was his finger. All of this foreshadowing about Scabbers being sick, about him living for an unusually long time, the beat about him being missing a toe, I suppose, in his rat form. It wouldn't be right to call that a finger, would it? But missing a part of his body here in his rat form. All of this is going deep into the backstory and the world building of Harry Potter. So that's the why Sirius escaped. He saw the newspaper clipping, which was introduced to us right at the beginning of the book too. Fudge left it behind when he came to inspect Azkaban last year. He gave me his paper. Thanks, Cornelius Fudge. You did great, ? And I can't really go into this, right? I can't spend a lot of time on this, and I don't think necessarily that it is thematically significant in the work of J.K. Rowling as it is in the work of J.R.R. Tolkien, for example. But there is an idea here that things could have been different, but they couldn't have been better. That is to say that even ill chance will yield positive results in time, that the universe itself seems to be moving in a just direction, that it is arcing toward justice, if you will, right? We'll maybe talk about that too later in the series. Good. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. So we get the explanation of why Sirius escaped Azkaban, and then the actual definitive reveal of Scabbers' true nature. Ready, Sirius? Said Lupin. Black had already retrieved Snape's wand from the bed. He approached Lupin and the struggling rat, and his wet eyes suddenly seemed to be burning in his face. Together, he said quietly. I think so, said Lupin, holding Scabbers tightly in one hand and his wand in the other, on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. A flash of blue-white light erupted from both wands. For a moment, Scabbers was frozen in midair, his small grey form twisting madly. Ron yelled, the rat fell and hit the floor. There was another blinding flash of light, and then it was like watching a speeded-up film of a growing tree. A head was shooting upward from the ground. Limbs were sprouting. A moment later, a man was standing where Scabbers had been, cringing and wringing his hands. Crookshanks was spitting and snarling on the bed. The hair on his back was standing up. He was a very short man, hardly taller than Harry and Hermione. His thin, colourless hair was unkempt, and there was a large bald patch on top. He had the shrunken appearance of a plump man who had lost a lot of weight in a short time. His skin looked grubby, almost like Scabbers' fur, and something of the rat lingered around his pointed nose and his very small, watery eyes. He looked around at them all, his breathing fast and shallow. Harry saw his eyes dart to the door and back again. Well, hello, Peter, said Lupin pleasantly, as though rats frequently erupted into old school friends around him. Long time no see. Sirius, Remus, Even Pettigrew's voice was squeaky. Again, his eyes darted toward the door. My friends, my old friends. The return of Peter Pettigrew, the final twist in the Scabbers saga. And again, interestingly, here, we'll just footnote this because we've been talking about it so much this session. Note that there is no spell here. There is no incantation here. To the best of my recollection, again, we never learn the spell that can be used to force an animagus out of his animal form. But apparently, it is known, at least to, well, one animagus and one werewolf, I guess. Again, too, I'm struck by Lupin and Black working together on this spell when we just had the proof that multiple people casting the same spell at the same time can have unforeseen circumstances. Ron, Hermione, and Harry did not intend to knock Severus Snape back across the room and to knock him unconscious, to render him unconscious through their use of the Expelliarmus spell, but it happened anyway. And we're grateful for that because that just makes this entire scene easier. That's fine, that's good, but that was not intended. Here we have two wizards casting the same spell at the same time, but apparently confident about the end result here. Gildarts Winters is just quoting the, "Hello, Peter. Isn't that great?" Yes, Kim's agreeing. There's a lot of talk here about Lupin's coolness. Lupin is one cool customer, says Katie. Yes, agrees Kim. Lupin is one of the coolest wizards ever. Yeah, this is a great, great moment. And another example of Rowling's ability to moderate her own tone. This is something that I'm much more aware of reading Azkaban this time than I ever have been previously, and I'm really looking forward to reading the other books in the series this closely and kind of watching for this, because we get something that is actually fairly grotesque and something fairly striking. You know, it was like watching a speeded up film of a growing tree. A head was shooting upward from the ground, limbs were sprouting. A moment later, a man was standing where Scabbers had been, cringing and wringing his hands. Then we get the description of Peter Pettigrew, which is not a good description, you guys. This is a pretty, inhuman or a pretty dehumanized man who is standing before them here. But then we managed to moderate this, not just with Lupin's coolness, but with the narrative voice too. "Well, hello, Peter," said Lupin pleasantly, as though rats frequently erupted into old school friends around him. "Long time no see." J.K. Rowling here engaging in one of my favorite metaphors, which is the anti-metaphor. Here he is looking as cool as if he were perfectly accustomed to a bizarre and abstract thing, which is also literally the bizarre and abstract thing that is happening. As though rats frequently erupted into old school friends around him. That's not a metaphor. That is not a simile here. That is just an actual representation of what is happening. And I like that very much. It's wry and it's just a little whimsical, and it's kind of recontextualizing what we've just seen, the grotesque and borderline horrifying thing that we have just seen, into something far more mundane, into something far more manageable there. Yeah. Okay, let's keep going on, because we've had the why Sirius escaped Azkaban, and now we've got the reveal of Scabbers, and now we're going to move into how Sirius escaped Azkaban. I mean, personally, I might have started with this one, but the exposition is kind of thick and fast in this chapter. "I don't know how I did it," he said slowly. "I think the only reason I never lost my mind is that I knew I was innocent. That wasn't a happy thought, so that the Dementors couldn't suck it out of me, but it kept me sane, and knowing who I am helped me keep my powers. So when it all became too much, I could transform in my cell, become a dog. Dementors can't see, he swallowed. They feel their way toward people by feeding off their emotions. They could tell that my feelings were less human, less complex when I was a dog. But they thought, of course, that I was losing my mind like everyone else in there, so it didn't trouble them. But I was weak, very weak, and I had no hope of driving them away from me without a wand. But then I saw Peter in that picture. I realized he was at Hogwarts with Harry, perfectly positioned to act if one hint reached his ears that the dark side was gathering strength again." Pettigrew was shaking his head, mouthing noiselessly, but staring all the while at Black as though hypnotized, ready to strike at the moment he could be sure of allies, and to deliver the last Potter to them. If he gave them Harry, who dare say he betrayed Lord Voldemort? He'd be welcomed back with honors. So you see, I had to do something. I was the only one who knew Peter was still alive. Harry remembered what Mr. Weasley had told Mrs. Weasley. "The guards say he's been talking in his sleep, always the same words. He's at Hogwarts." It was as if someone had lit a fire in my head and the Dementors couldn't destroy it. It wasn't a happy feeling. It was an obsession. but it gave me strength. It cleared my mind. So one night when they opened my door to bring food, I slipped past them as a dog. It's so much harder for them to sense animal emotions that they were confused. I was thin, very thin enough to slip through the bars. I swam as a dog back to the mainland. I journeyed north and slipped into the Hogwarts grounds as a dog. I've been living in the forest ever since, except when I came to watch the Quidditch, of course. You fly as well as your father did, Harry. He looked at Harry, who did not look away. Believe me, croaked Black. Believe me, Harry. I never betrayed James and Lily. I would have died before I betrayed them. Because we've been talking about humanity and because we've been talking about inhumanity so much through the course of this book, we must pay attention here to Sirius Black's account. What is it that keeps him whole in Azkaban? Well, the knowledge of his innocence, not happiness, not joy. He is not resisting the Dementors. He has no expecto patronum charm all his own, but he is resisting the Dementors by another means, through the application of pain, through the application of suffering, of injustice. He knows that he is innocent and he suffers because of that, but that keeps him alive, and that crucially keeps him who he is. But we also, at the same time, get this perspective on that pain, that he can transform himself into his dog form, which is, as he says, they could tell that my feelings were less human, less complex when I was a dog. To be anything other than human is to be less than human? Well, okay, no, not necessarily. We can draw a pretty bold line there, even given the material that we've had so far in this run. We have looked upon the centaurs with an enormous amount of respect. We've even looked upon the goblins with an enormous amount of respect, and we've looked at house elves too. This is not to suggest that to be less than human is to be worse than human, but for a human being to be less, I think, is something different, is to be, I guess we've got to be careful of our terms here, right? Sirius Black is not becoming less human. Sirius Black is becoming less Sirius Black. But he is defined still by that thing that gives him his identity, that seed of his identity. And we see this twice. The knowledge of his innocence keeps him whole. The knowledge that Peter Pettigrew is at Hogwarts, or is returning to Hogwarts on Ron's shoulder after the summer holidays are over, gives him purpose. That obsession also a source of internal conflict for Sirius Black, and yet that is what gives him the motive force that he needs to escape. Kate says, I never betrayed James and Lily is such a better way to start getting to know Harry than I don't deny I killed them. Yes, yes, that betrayal, absolutely crucial, yes. Referring to Harry's flying is a big moment here, says Joseph. First time he talks about something not directly related to his revenge. Absolutely, yeah. Gildarts is calling out, you fly as well as your father did, Harry. Damn! Yes, it's pretty good. It's pretty good. Yes, and Kim here is drawing the connection, of course, between the the chat scrolled. There we go. Kim is drawing the connection here between the Dementors and this depression allegory that we've had throughout the course of the book, this very well-documented depression allegory. Kim says, seems to work with the depression analogy too, staying sane through one very strong thought or will, right? This idea that yes, it's not about happiness. Sometimes making it through the day, sometimes keeping your focus, your presence, your identity is not about happiness. It's not about the expecto patronum. It's not about driving the Dementors off. It's about giving them nothing to feed upon. And I'm reminded of, weirdly reminded of Star Trek V, wherein, Kirk gets that great speech, I need my pain. I'm defined by my pain. That sometimes your pain can be as much a part of who you are as your happiest memories. Again, we're not going to explore that here, but we are getting the counterpoint. And there's a difference between, when I say we're not going to explore it here, that doesn't mean that it wasn't intentional. It doesn't mean that it wasn't deliberate. It doesn't mean that it doesn't carry significant weight. It just means that we're not going to put our focus on it. We're not putting the narrative focus on it. Yes, good. So that's how Sirius Black escapes Azkaban. Then we get a little, how would you define this? A little Black and Lupin good cop, lunatic cop kind of interrogation of Peter Pettigrew. We get to the root of his actions. He justifies why it was that he did what he did. We get the explanation from Sirius Black about why Pettigrew stayed in hiding. And then we get something very important. Then we get forgiveness. Forgive me, Remus, said Black. Not at all, Padfoot, old friend, said Lupin, who was now rolling up his sleeves. And will you, in turn, forgive me for believing you were the spy? Of course, said Black, and the ghost of a grin flitted across his gaunt face. He, too, began rolling up his sleeves. Shall we kill him together? Yes, I think so, said Lupin grimly. You wouldn't, you won't, gasped Pettigrew, and he scrambled around to Ron. Ron, haven't I been a good friend, a good pet? You wouldn't let them kill me, Ron, will you? You're on my side, aren't you? But Ron was staring at Pettigrew with the utmost revulsion. I let you sleep in my bed, he said. Kind boy, kind master, Pettigrew crawled toward Ron. You wouldn't let them do it. I was your rat. I was a good pet. If you made a better rat than a human, it's not much to boast about, Peter, said Black harshly. Ron, going still paler with pain, wrenched his broken leg out of Pettigrew's reach. Pettigrew turned on his knees, staggered forward, and seized the hem of Hermione's robes. Sweet girl, clever girl, you wouldn't let them. Help me. Hermione pulled her robes out of Pettigrew's clutching hands and backed away against the wall, looking horrified. Pettigrew knelt, trembling uncontrollably, and turned his head slowly toward Harry. Harry, you look just like your father, just like him. How dare you speak to Harry, roared Black. How dare you face him? How dare you talk about James in front of him? Harry, whispered Pettigrew, shuffling toward him, hands outstretched. Harry, James wouldn't have wanted me killed. James would have understood, Harry. He would have shown me mercy. So we're building our 3-beat here. We're getting ready now for the final enacting of justice, for the final stroke of virtue here, of goodness here, of rightness here. Justice is about to be restored to the world. Peter Pettigrew is going to pay for his horrific crime. He goes to Ron first, appealing to Ron as a pet. And again, okay, another minor beat here. We've talked about this more than once through the course of this book. But again, we get J.K. Rowling's masterful perspective on Ron and Hermione and, by extension, Pettigrew's intelligence. How does he appeal to Ron? By personal, emotional connection. You know me, wasn't I a good pet? Don't we have a thing, you and me, Ron? Won't you protect me? And Ron says no. Ron also says, I let you sleep in my bed, which is a weird comedic beat that, I mean, I don't want to necessarily say that it has that stain of gay panic on it, but it doesn't not have that. There's at least a viable interpretation of that. But in any case, I mean, we can, instead of accepting that interpretation, I think just look at Ron's horror that this pet that he has cared for has been revealed now to be this disheveled and grotesque looking man. So he appeals to Ron personally, and Ron refuses. He then appeals to Hermione. Sweet girl, clever girl, you wouldn't let them. Help me. This is kind of the Buckbeak thing, right? He's kind of appealing to Hermione, knowing that Hermione will want to see a legalistic kind of justice as opposed to a naturalistic kind of justice enacted here. She will want to see justice doesn't have to be done. It also has to be seen to be done, right? She will want to do this properly because that is who Hermione is. But Hermione also rejects him. Then he turns to Harry and he says to Harry, Harry, you look just like your father, just like him. What is his appeal to Harry? He's appealing through emotion to Ron. He's appealing through intellect, we might speculate, to Hermione. Sweet girl, clever girl. But what is his appeal to Harry? Well, his appeal to Harry is the appeal of someone seeking the blessing of the hero. He is appealing here to the ego. Neither the id nor the superego can help him. So he's going straight for the ego. He's going straight for the sense of self. Harry, you look just like your father. Your father wouldn't have wanted me killed. So therefore, you don't? Be a good son, Harry. Be the man that you are, the boy that you are. That's the approach here. Yes, exactly. Elizabeth says, how much of the traits of the power trio has Scabbers absorbed as a rat? Apparently, a lot. He knows them very, very well. Apparently, he has a profound understanding of all three of the power trio here. Yeah. You slept in my bed for years. You better shut up now, says Lynn. Fair. Right. And of course, because I'm so interested in talking about Pettigrew and the power trio, I've skipped over this dark moment with Lupin and Black, right? This moment of forgiveness and connection and a kind of rehabilitation of their relationship here. Forgive me, Remus, not at all, Padfoot, my old friend, and will you in turn forgive me for believing you were the spy? Of course, said Black, and the shadow of a grin. Should we kill him together? It is about justice, but it is a dark, personal kind of justice. It is vengeance more than it is societal justice here. Good. Okay. Yes. Rob says, I feel like calling him Padfoot here is restoring the old Sirius. Absolutely. But both. It is itself restorative of the old Sirius, right? He is drawing Sirius back to his old self, but also it is in recognition of a pre-existing restoration. You know, Sirius is now more his old self, and it is. Yes, this is a recognition of Padfoot, fellow marauder, not Sirius Black, suspected spy. Yeah. Good. And as Elizabeth says, encapsulating perfectly one of the primary themes of this book, all the justice in Harry Potter is dark personal justice. The other justice system is broken. Yes. And Angela encapsulates this beautifully. I love you, man. I love you, man. Should we kill him together? Yeah. Yes. Good. Good. Oh, wow. Yes. And Ryan has a beat here. I wonder what Peter thought the first day on the Hogwarts Express when he poked his head out of Ron's pocket and saw James. Saw, you know, as has been said before, you know, Harry is the spit of his father except for his eyes. And yeah, that must have been a really weird moment. I wonder, gosh, I should go back and read that scene now. I should go back and read that description of Scabbers and see if we get any indication that there's anything there. Of course, not textual, you know, support of this, because I don't believe for a moment that this was intended by J.K. Rowling in that first book, but nonetheless, it is a thing of beauty. Okay. So Peter has appealed to emotion and been turned down there. His appeal has been declined. He appeals to intellect, and that appeal is declined too. He then appeals to Harry's own essential heroism. And of course, it works out. No, Harry yelled. He ran forward, placing himself in front of Pettigrew, facing the wands. You can't kill him, he said breathlessly. You can't. Black and Lupin both looked staggered. Harry, this piece of vermin is the reason you have no parents, Black snarled. This cringing bit of filth would have seen you die too without turning a hair. You heard him. His own stinking skin meant more to him than your whole family. I know, Harry panted. We'll take him up to the castle. We'll hand him over to the Dementors. He can go to Azkaban, but don't kill him. Harry, gasped Pettigrew, and he flung his arms around Harry's knees. Thank you, it's more than I deserve. Thank you. Get off me, Harry spat, throwing Pettigrew's hands off him in disgust. I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it because I don't reckon my dad would have wanted them to become killers just for you. No one moved or made a sound except Pettigrew, whose breath was coming in wheezes as he clutched his chest. Black and Lupin were looking at each other. Then, with one movement, they lowered their wands. You're the only person who has the right to decide, Harry, said Black. But think what he did. He can go to Azkaban, Harry repeated. If anyone deserves that place, he does. What is it that compels Harry to take action here? Well, Peter was close. He did the right thing. He took the right approach. His strategy was sound. He targets Harry through his father. That's smart. That shows that he knows who Harry is at this point. But his conclusion is erroneous. It's not that Harry doesn't want Peter Pettigrew to die. Again, he is talking about sending him off to Azkaban. He is talking about handing him over to the Dementors. It is very likely that either immediately through the Dementors' kiss or over time at Azkaban, Peter Pettigrew will, in fact, cease to exist. He is, in a sense, talking about killing Peter. But what's the difference here? Why is he taking action now? Why is he interposing himself between Black and Lupin and Peter Pettigrew? Not because he doesn't want Pettigrew to die, either metaphorically or even arguably literally, but because he doesn't want Black and Lupin to become murderers. That's a very different intent. That's a very different perspective on this core conflict, but it's powerful. It works really beautifully for me, and I find it completely convincing. Kim says, Harry did the right thing here, and it comes back to bite him in the ass so hard. It speaks for Harry's character that this moment, giving Peter mercy, which turns everything sour, doesn't turn Harry ruthless. That's a very good point, right? Harry manages to, well, you know, we'll have the opportunity to talk about how Harry walks that moral line in the rest of the series. Yes. Peter Pettigrew, says Disney Dale, is the perfect encapsulation of someone who only values his own safety and comfort and can come up with a billion reasons his actions for self-preservation are justified. Yes, there are many people in the world like that. Yes. C-Star says, I always mentally head desk when Harry makes them spare Peter. Voldemort may have found some other means of resurrection, but still, yes, minor spoilers for the subsequent book in the series, I suppose. But again, Harry here Gosh, it's so interesting and it's so layered, and it's the kind of conversation that more often than not you find yourself having around noir stories and noir storytelling, right? Because what Harry is doing here is preserving innocence. He's preserving an essential and inalienable virtue, right? He doesn't want these people, these important people in his life, these important people in his life, these important people in his father's life, in his mother's life, he doesn't want them to be tainted by something. Once that shadow falls upon the soul, it is difficult, if not impossible, to remove. You cross a threshold here. And this, again, will be explicitly important later in the series, but is already kind of enfolded into our understanding of J.K. Rowling's moral universe here. You know, look back at Tom Riddle, look back at Professor Quirrell, even, for goodness sake. We can see similar kind of elements in play here. The taking of a life directly is an inescapable kind of sin within J.K. Rowling's moral universe. Yeah. Yes, Ryan asks, I want to go back to the discussion from Chamber of Secrets about why Peter was in Gryffindor. You guys, the houses. Though, you know, it's funny. I was just mentioning that J.R.R. Tolkien connection earlier. This idea that that it could have been different, but it couldn't have been better. That ultimately every evil end will bring about good. That every kind of every compromise and catastrophe along the way will yield the only good outcome that could ever have happened. You know, that ultimately all of these tragedies are necessary for the good that flows forth from them. I'm not sure that's an inescapable part of J.K. Rowling's, you know, kind of cosmological or theological proposition for Harry Potter, in a way that it is absolutely inescapable as a proposition contained, you know, encoded into at the deepest levels, J.R.R. Tolkien's world building. But it does give us a perspective on the houses, right? Why are these kids in this house? Well, because they have to be. Because one way or another, they have to be. And that's particularly important, again, later in the series, when we start really talking about prophecy, when we start really talking about the foretelling of the future, and whether or not there is some kind of, I guess, organizational impulse to the universe itself, whether, you know, the universe is coordinating things, or fate, or destiny, or magic itself, or God, or, you know, whatever kind of agent of fate we would like to kind of credit with responsibility for this. We're definitely going to have the opportunity to talk about how that works in Harry Potter. Yes. Good. Okay. Let's keep pushing. I can't believe we're still only covering the first chapter, but we only have a few slides from the second chapter. That is the end of this chapter, though. As Harry intervenes to prevent the murder, we move into the Dementor's kiss. And here, let's just take a moment. Let's just take a moment for a sweet scene, shall we? You know, we've been through a lot. Everything looks like it's going to be fine. Let's take a moment to enjoy a beat with Harry and Sirius here. You know what this means, Black said abruptly to Harry as they made their slow progress along the tunnel. Turning Pettigrew in? You're free, said Harry. Yes, said Black, but I'm also, I don't know if anyone ever told you, I'm your godfather. Yeah, I knew that, said Harry. Well, your parents appointed me your guardian, said Black stiffly. If anything happened to them. Harry waited. Did Black mean what he thought he meant? I'll understand, of course, if you want to stay with your aunt and uncle, said Black. But, well, think about it. Once my name's cleared, if you wanted a different home. Some sort of explosion took place in the pit of Harry's stomach. What, live with you? He said, accidentally cracking his head on a bit of rock protruding from the ceiling. Leave the Dursleys? Of course, I thought you wouldn't want to, said Black quickly. I understand. I just thought Are you insane? Said Harry, his voice easily as croaky as Black's. Of course I want to leave the Dursleys. Have you got a house? When can I move in? Black turned right around to look at him. Snape's head was scraping the ceiling, but Black didn't seem to care. You want to, he said. You mean it? Yeah, I mean it, said Harry. Black's gaunt face broke into the first true smile Harry had seen upon it. The difference it made was startling, as though a person 10 years younger were shining through the starved mask. For a moment, he was recognizable as the man who had laughed at Harry's parents' wedding. And so, yes, I mean, yes, you're absolutely right. All of you who are shouting in the Crowdcast chat right now, yes, he's offering Harry a home. It is the greatest thing. I adore this beat. It's so good. But also, we're seeing here the consequence of justice. What is justice doing here? Justice has been done in a sense, or at least we're on the path to enacting the just resolution of these affairs. And what has it done? It has literally humanized Sirius Black again, not just in terms of his I mean, in terms of his connection with Harry, absolutely. That is very powerful. He is now thinking of the future. He's thinking past the moment. He's thinking of himself as a man. He's thinking of the promise that he made to James and Lily, not the promise that he made to James and Lily, but the other promise that he made to James and Lily, the offer to protect Harry as a godfather. Though, yeah, I mean, religion in Harry Potter is always a little weird and a little tangential. It is odd, I didn't even mention it, but it is odd in one of those earlier slides when Lupin breathes, "Oh God," that's so rare in Harry Potter to invoke that kind of language. You know, it's "by Merlin's beard" is a much more common kind of play on that, but Lupin strips that away and we get this much more stark declamation there in that moment. But here, Sirius Black has been effectively and quite powerfully rehumanized. We're allowed now to draw breath. He looks like a man 10 years younger. He looks like the man who laughed at James and Lily Potter's wedding. He looks like he looks the way he looked, I suppose, before Azkaban. Justice. Justice can have the power to heal, not the justice of vengeance, though. Again, because we're talking about handing Peter Pettigrew over to the authorities, ultimately over to Azkaban, ultimately over to the Dementors, not retribution, not vengeance, but here we're doing things properly at least, and that is itself restorative, that is itself whole. Let me see here. Ethan says, is this only a reaction of how much Harry hates privilege? Does he really feel a connection to Sirius at this point? 15 minutes ago, he was punching this dude in the face, and now they're going to move in. Yeah, I mean, yes. In part, it has to be, right? In part, it has to be. And yet, I do think that we're supposed to believe that Harry and Sirius have a bond. And I think that, you know, we can see that textually in a couple of spots, particularly the reference to Harry's parents' wedding here, right? Were the Dursleys laughing at Lily and James's wedding? No. So instead, he's seeing someone who has a connection with his parents and is thus more representative of family than Vernon and Petunia Dursley. But yes, I mean, it is fast. It is fast. Good. Elizabeth says, I love the way JKR had Black let Snape's head bob along and hit the ceiling. It's such a good, like, minor beat. I just adore that. Yeah, good. Okay. So then we get out into the moonlight and the clouds part and the moon is shining and Lupin... Oh, Lupin, when it says take this potion once daily after meals, you really got to follow the instructions on your medication. You really do have to. It's very, very important. And he didn't. So he transforms into a werewolf. He battles with Sirius. Harry takes off. And by the lake, we have the run-in with the Dementors. And this, I've got 2 slides here, and this is going to conclude this week's reading and catch up here. I'm going to live with my godfather. I'm leaving the Dursleys. He forced himself to think of Black and only Black and began to chant, Expecto Patronum! Expecto Patronum! Black gave a shudder, rolled over, and lay motionless on the ground, pale as death. He'll be all right. I'm going to go and live with him. Expecto Patronum! Hermione, help me! Expecto Patronum! Expecto, Hermione whispered. Expecto, expecto. But she couldn't do it. The Dementors were closing in, barely 10 feet from them. They formed a solid wall around Harry and Hermione and were getting closer. Expecto Patronum! Harry yelled, trying to blot the screaming from his ears. Expecto Patronum! A thin wisp of silver escaped his wand and hovered like mist before him. At the same moment, Harry felt Hermione collapse next to him. He was alone, completely alone. Expecto Patronum! Harry felt his knees hit the cold grass. Fog was clouding his eyes. With a huge effort, he fought to remember. Sirius was innocent. Innocent will be okay. I'm going to live with him. Expecto Patronum! He gasped. By the feeble light of his formless Patronus, he saw a Dementor halt very close to him. It couldn't walk through the cloud of silver mist Harry had conjured. A dead, slimy hand slid out from under the cloak. It made a gesture as though to sweep the Patronus aside. No, no, Harry gasped. He's innocent. Expecto Patronum! He could feel them watching him, hear their rattling breath like an evil wind around him. The nearest Dementor seemed to be considering him. Then it raised both its rotting hands and lowered its hood. Where there should have been eyes, there was only thin, gray, scabbed skin, stretched blankly over empty sockets. But there was a mouth, a gaping, shapeless hole, sucking the air with the sound of a death rattle. A paralyzing terror filled Harry so that he couldn't move or speak. His Patronus flickered and died. And after all of our discussions here of Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, I'm just really grateful that the 100 or so Dementors crossing the frozen lake here aren't sniffing. Like, I'm just glad. I don't need them to be sniffing right now. Dead hands, gray scabbed skin. Yes, it's pretty horrifying and awful, but at least, you guys, they're not also sniffing the air. This, I think, gives us a powerful indication that despite our, hesitation here, Harry is actually looking forward to living with Sirius Black. He obviously believes in Sirius Black at this point, because it isn't just, I'm going to live with my godfather, thought one. I'm leaving the Dursleys, thought two. Those two thoughts, obviously interconnected, but discrete. Then when we go through that first cycle, he'll be all right. I'm going to go and live with him. He'll be all right. I'm going to go and live with him. Separate thoughts, but interconnected thoughts, and no mention of the Dursleys. Then we move down. Sirius was innocent. Innocent. We'll be okay. I'm going to live with him. He was innocent. He was innocent. Why the recitation of Sirius's innocence there? Why, as Harry is trying to find reasons to be joyous, does he turn to Sirius Black's innocence here? I mean, that is a fact, but it doesn't change what happened to Harry's parents. It doesn't change the screaming that he can hear in this moment. Why is he thinking of Sirius Black? Well, I think there are two reasons. I think the first is, I'm going to go and live with him. This personal connection. I'm going to have family again for the first time in my conscious life. I'm going to have a family. I mean, we can talk about the Weasleys, you guys. We can talk about Hermione, and we can talk about Ron, and we can talk about Hagrid, and we can talk about even Minerva McGonagall, and we can certainly talk about Papa Dumbledore, but he's going to have a real family. He's going to have someone with a personal connection to him, to his parents. It's a continuation of his family line in that sense. He's going to have that. But he's also thinking of Sirius Black's innocence, which suggests to me two possible interpretations. The first, that he is actually just invested in the personhood of Sirius Black at this point. The fact that Sirius is good, the fact that he is virtuous, the fact that he was a friend of his father and his mother, the fact that he is innocent, that is itself hopeful, that it is itself important, because Harry is already emotionally connected to this man. Or alternatively, if we don't buy the personal connection between Harry and Sirius at this point, which, yes, has erupted out of nowhere pretty suddenly, that's fair. If we don't buy that, we can see him referencing Sirius's innocence here as a token of justice, right? Sirius is innocent and he escaped Azkaban, and now justice has been done, or justice is going to be done, or things are going to be all right. There is hope in the world. There is justice in the world. This is kind of, yes, externalizing his hope in a sense. I live in a fair society, could be Harry's thought here, that he's scrabbling toward in order to empower his Patronus, in order to fuel his Patronus here. It is, though, a very dark scene. And when we see Hermione fall, she couldn't do it. The Dementors were closing in barely 10 feet from them. They formed a solid wall around Harry and Hermione and were getting closer. And then as he's trying, and yeah, it's really tough to read. Let me see here. Anna asks, do you think Harry is able to produce a Patronus so young because he has known so much pain and can truly appreciate hope and joy? I like that very much. I like that very, very much. Is Harry's ability, is his skill with the Patronus charm? Okay, I'm having three thoughts at once, and I want to try and kind of parse this out. Okay, when Lupin introduces us to the Patronus charm, he describes it as a very advanced technique. This is not going to be taught to you during your time at Hogwarts. Minor spoilers, later in the series, Harry's going to be able to teach this to pretty much everyone. Pretty much everyone is going to be able to do the Patronus charm. Why then isn't the Patronus charm taught at Hogwarts? Well, okay, conspiracy theory, as we've discussed before, says that the Ministry does not want the Patronus charm to be taught to all wizards, because if every wizard knows the Patronus charm, then the Dementors actually aren't that scary anymore. That's a problem if the Ministry is depending upon the Dementors to guard Azkaban specifically, but also be put into the field in times of emergency, in times of crisis, like, the escape of Sirius Black. So it's possible that, yes, the conspiracy theory is that the Ministry doesn't want wizards to know about Expecto Patronum as a charm. The alternative is that it is, in fact, just a very advanced and sophisticated technique. And under normal circumstances, most people can't cast it, because under normal circumstances, most people don't have the breadth or depth of experience that Harry Potter has. And by the time that he is able to teach it to a lot of the kids at Hogwarts, they too are going to know horror and fear and loss and desperation. Yes, I think it is possible that knowing pain and knowing suffering does make you more appreciative of joy and hope. It certainly makes you more conscious, more mindful of joy and hope, and thus allows you to cast the charm, allows you to kind of embrace the full range of human emotion, in which case that pain and suffering itself, and this kind of circles us back around to Sirius and his time at Azkaban, that pain and suffering itself is valuable, right? It's not just an unfortunate thing. Yes, okay, sorry, terrible things happen to you, but hey, at least now you can summon a bunny, or you can summon an otter, or whatever. Yes, but more importantly, the full knowledge of human emotion literally empowers you, right? And certainly will get, and arguably have already received, the kind of inverse perspective on that, which is that cutting out joy and hope and love and connection and familial bonds, cutting those things out of your life does make you less than you would otherwise be. The greatest of us are the most human of us, and the most human of us are those who have experienced the highs and the lows. So yes, Anna, I think that's a fascinating thought. I like that a great deal. I think you're right. I think you're on the money there. Yeah, good. Let me see here as I scroll down. Okay, good. I think we're caught up, and I've got one more slide, and then I've got a hard out. So let's do the last part of this chapter. As I say, we lose the final fight here for the first time. White fog was blinding him. He had to fight, expecto patronum. He couldn't see, and in the distance he heard the familiar screaming, expecto patronum. He groped in the mist for Sirius and found his arm. They weren't going to take him. But a pair of strong, clammy hands suddenly attached themselves around Harry's neck. They were forcing his face upward. He could feel its breath. It was going to get rid of him first. He could feel its putrid breath. His mother was screaming in his ears. She was going to be the last thing he ever heard. And then, through the fog that was drowning him, he thought he saw a silvery light growing brighter and brighter. He felt himself fall forward onto the grass, face down, too weak to move, sick and shaking. Harry opened his eyes. The Dementor must have released him. The blinding light was illuminating the grass around him. The screaming had stopped. The cold was ebbing away. Something was driving the Dementors back. It was circling around him and Black and Hermione. They were leaving. The air was warm again. With every ounce of strength he could muster, Harry raised his head a few inches and saw an animal amid the light, galloping away across the lake. Eyes blurred with sweat, Harry making what it was. Bright as a unicorn. Fighting to stay conscious, Harry watched it canter to a halt as it reached the opposite shore. For a moment, Harry saw by its brightness somebody welcoming it back, raising his hand to pat it, someone who looked strangely familiar. But it couldn't be. Harry didn't understand. He couldn't think anymore. He felt the last of his strength leave him, and his head hit the ground as he fainted. This is beautifully written and beautifully composed. The white fog blinding him. He had to fight all of these ellipses, all of these fragmented thoughts, but not fragmented with M dashes, not hard, sharp fragmentations of thought, but slow, drifting fragmentations of thought. He had to fight ellipsis, expecto patronum ellipsis. He couldn't see ellipsis. And in the distance, he heard the familiar screaming ellipsis, expecto patronum ellipsis, and so on and so forth. We're really dragging out Harry's suffering here and kind of drawing him as we collapse the prose of the novel into fog and mist and insensibility. So we are drawn into Harry's personal experience. He could feel its breath. It was going to get rid of him first. He could feel its putrid breath. His mother was screaming in his ears. She was going to be the last thing he ever heard. And then we get the sharp M dash. Then we get the cut to something. And then through the fog that was drowning him, he thought he saw a silvery light growing brighter and brighter. So we're controlling the pacing again masterfully. We've talked about J.K. Rowling's skill with pacing through the pages of this novel already. It's really profoundly beautiful. But the sinking into the Dementors, the kind of sinking into insensibility and into repetition, and even here too, I think this is occurring to me just now as I'm reading it. Even here, his groping for Sirius. He groped in the mist for Sirius and found his arm. They weren't going to take him. No mention of Hermione. Hermione has even faded from the narrative at this point. He's anchored to Sirius and Sirius explicitly. That's, I think, may lead us to some powerful conclusions here. Yeah. That, though, I mean, okay, we're going to get another chance to come back around to this. No spoilers in next week's session. We do have to talk about next week's session, though, and then I'll take a couple of very quick questions before we wrap up. Okay, here is our schedule for the rest of this season of Dear Mr. Potter. There are 3 things of which you ought to be aware. Next session, as you know, Dear Mr. Potter generally goes out on a Tuesday, but next Tuesday is Halloween, and I know that means that lots of us have plans. Lots of us are taking children trick-or-treating or getting dressed up as, you know, a sexy Patronus and going out to a party. I don't know what a sexy Patronus would look like, and I refuse to Google it. So I'm never going to find out. I'm just going to happily live in my ignorance with regard to that. But we're going to dress up as a sexy Patronus, and we're going to go out to a great Halloween party. So no Dear Mr. Potter next week. Instead, I am moving it forward to this coming Sunday. This Sunday, 10 p.m. Eastern, October the 29th, chapters 21 and 22, Hermione's Secret and Owl Post. Again, the last 2 chapters of the book. They are not long chapters, you guys. This book moves into its final act, or is moving through its final act, I guess. A lot to cover, but we'll discuss that on Sunday at 10 p.m. Eastern. That's Sunday, October 29th. Then, next Friday, the first Friday of November, 9 p.m. Eastern, we're going to live tweet Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, the movie version. We're going to live tweet that movie 9 p.m. on Friday, November 3rd. And then the last session in our regular season for Dear Mr. Potter will take place at 10 p.m. Eastern on Tuesday, November the 7th, when we will discuss the movie. We'll talk about the adaptive choices that are made within the frame of this film. That is going to be a really interesting discussion. I very much like the movie, and I very much enjoy the movie just as a story. And I also very much appreciate the movie as an adaptive text. You know, the choices that are made to serve the movie, I think, are pretty much universally good, or universally powerful, at least, narratively effective, at least, I should say. Sexy Voldemort suggests Gilderoy Winters. Oh no, that's so very bad. That's so very bad. Please no, please not that. Yes. Okay, so we've got 3 more sessions to go. That's how that is all going to work. You can find all of this information by heading on over to pointnorthmedia.com and clicking the podcasts button, where you can see the entire calendar. The calendar is now worked out through to pretty much the middle of November. I guess, yeah, the last session listed is not the middle of November, but November 7th. And then we're going to talk. In the course of the next couple of weeks, I will figure out what we're going to do next. We were talking for a while about covering A Wizard of Earthsea by Ursula K. Le Guin. I'm not sure whether we'll do a fast read of that or a one-shot discussion of that, or we'll go week by week through that. If you have preferences, get in touch and let me know, and then we will get into Goblet of Fire. So there may be a week or 2 without a Dear Mr. Potter in the run-up to the holidays. We've got Thanksgiving coming up, we've got Christmas, you know, things to think about. So there may be a week or 2 without a regular episode, but as far as possible, I will try and adjust the episodes so that they can be, you know, accessible, so that we don't miss an entire week. That'd be the better way to do it. Live tweets are only on Twitter, says C-Star. No, I think what we're going to do, I have a couple of ideas for live tweets. One of them is doing a live tweet right here on Crowdcast, right? I can't stream the video. I can't stream the movie to you. I can't screen share the movie to you. That is wildly illegal. That would be a bad thing to do. But what I can do is just put up a still that says, you know, Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban live tweet, whatever, and then we can just use the Crowdcast chat room. That's a perfectly serviceable thing to do. We can use Twitter. We can also use the Point North Discord. Head on over to pointnorthmedia.com. Scroll right down to the bottom of the page. You'll see a little Discord button labeled there in the footer. Just click that. You can register for Discord. You can now register for the Point North Discord, even if you are not a Patreon supporter. So the discussion will take place on one or all of those platforms, almost definitely more than one platform, right? Well, I'll have Twitter going anyway, where we'll use the hashtag Dear Mr. Potter, and then either Discord or Crowdcast or something, some kind of place where we can hang out and have these conversations. I know that Twitter is not for everyone, and sometimes, yes, a live tweet not on Twitter, says Danielle Robertson. I'm in. Excellent. Good. Yeah, get in touch and let me know what you guys would prefer for A Wizard of Earthsea and how you would like to cover it. I think it would be it's such a great book anyway, and also so informative of the kind of, it's not directly informative of Harry Potter. I believe that J.K. Rowling had not read A Wizard of Earthsea prior to writing Harry Potter, but what it is definitive of the kinds of traditions that J.K. Rowling is drawing upon, you know, by intermediated text, by intermediated storytelling, J.K. Rowling was referencing A Wizard of Earthsea by Ursula K. Le Guin in exactly the same way she was referencing The Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien, despite not having read it directly. Okay, let me cancel that slide and take a couple quick questions. Hey, everybody, how you doing? Here I am, back full screen. I tried tracking this, says Ethan in the little question box here. I tried tracking this, but it doesn't happen in these chapters. When does Harry stop referring to him as Black and starts referring to him as Sirius? He's referred to as Sirius by the narrator at the beginning of chapter 20, Black everywhere else except by Remus and Peter. Do you know? I have no idea. I have no idea, Ethan, is the answer to that question. That is a really great observation and a very powerful one. That's a very, very good pull indeed. I'm not sure. Certainly sometime around there. I would like to go back. Yeah, that's a good question, and I feel as though the answer would be illuminative. Yes, good. I'm afraid that I can't tell you definitively right now, but I will definitely look it up after I'm done. I came in late, says Rob Glass. Did anyone explain why the twins never thought it was weird that Peter Pettigrew was showing up on the map when he was Scabbers? Nope. Nope. No one ever explains why that should be the case. I mean, the kind of superficial reading of that would be, no, I got nothing. I got nothing, you guys. I guess we don't know. Are we told for how long Fred and George Weasley have been in possession of the Marauders map before they give it to Harry? I mean, if it's not long, then it makes a certain kind of sense. Perhaps it was only from the beginning of term and then they hand it over at Christmas, and maybe they're not using it within the bounds of Hogwarts in quite the same way. I mean, it's a large map by all accounts. So if you're not going looking for, you know, your brother, though it seems pretty certain that the first thing they would do would be to go looking for it, to go looking for, you know, their family members. Oh, look, there's Percy. Hey, look, there's Ginny. There's Ron. Yeah, no, there's, to the best of my knowledge, there is no explanation there. Yeah, good. The Marauders map causing problems since Prisoner of Azkaban. Kate says, since we're on Snape again this week, can we talk about how when Snape assigned them the essay on werewolves, it was specifically designed to recognize and to kill werewolves? This is a step further than just being able to recognize Lupin's symptoms, but it's also perfectly Snape, right? It's perfectly Slytherin. The injunction, we never get the language of the injunction, and I wish that we did. The injunction from Dumbledore says, Snape, you are going to make this wolfsbane potion for Lupin. You are presumably going to make sure that Lupin takes it. You are going to administer it to Lupin. That's the only reason why I can imagine Snape goes to Lupin's office, not once, but twice within the course, twice that we know about in the course of the book. And certainly that's enough that we might infer a regular pattern there. But this is so very Slytherin. Okay, I have to make him the potion. I have to take him the potion. I have to make sure he drinks the potion. I'm not allowed, presumably also as a part of the injunction, to tell people that Remus Lupin is a werewolf. Okay. But it's not my fault if some enterprising school children like Hermione Granger, for example, should discover that Remus Lupin is a werewolf and then spread that news themselves. My hands are clean. I didn't do anything. I'm just trying to teach the kids some, you know, defense against the dark arts. By the way, have I mentioned that I'm super good at that and should definitely be hired to fill this role? Yeah, it's a very Slytherin act. This I'm not touching you kind of skirting the edge of the rules. I absolutely believe that Severus Snape is capable of doing that. Yeah, which by inference kind of reinforces the idea that I keep referring to it as an injunction. I can't believe that it's a deal, right? I can't believe that Dumbledore kind of sat down with Snape and said, okay, I will give you my chocolate frog collection cards. I will give you, you know, whatever it is that you want. Tenure. You've got tenure, Snape. Is that what you want? You get my seat at the table in the Great Hall. I can't imagine that Dumbledore negotiated with him as much as he said, do not cross me. These are my terms. So Snape obeyed those terms. Followed the letter of the law, if not the spirit of the law, which is the Slytherin way. Katie asks, did Peter in a way give Sirius Black the means to escape by giving him the truth of being innocent? Is it too far to say that Peter made possible his own fate? No, Katie, I think that's exactly right. I think that kind of connects to those ideas that I was talking about earlier, that it could have been different, but it couldn't have been better. That every tragedy kind of motivates the ultimate good, you know? And in part, I want to kind of, because I've been talking so much about J.R.R. Tolkien, where that is an intrinsic part of his world building, I do want to kind of distill that out a little bit. I'm not convinced that that is a part of the world of Harry Potter. I'm not convinced that cosmologically or theologically or philosophically, J.K. Rowling necessarily believes this to be true, because it is also a functional and fundamental truth of most stories. In most stories, the protagonist is going to overcome obstacles and endure tragedies in order to get to the good ending. So in a sense, everything that the protagonist goes through does lead to the ending, because narratives are generally linear. There are some exceptions, but narratives are generally linear, and generally speaking, the end is a good one. So it could just be a narrative function rather than a philosophical or theological function, as it certainly is for J.R.R. Tolkien. But in any case, I do think that it's evident. I do think that, yeah, this is the only way that it could have happened, right? Ultimately, good things will happen because these terrible things happened. And not these terrible things happened, but later good things will happen that are disconnected from those terrible things. So, hey, it'll all balance out in the end. You know, life's really more about the good than it is about the bad. But, you know, sometimes it rains and sometimes it's nothing so trite as that. It's nothing so simplistic as that. These good things that will happen explicitly because bad things happened. That's, you know, pretty much fundamental to, you know, the narrative art, but also to our perspective on Harry Potter's world. Yeah. Let me see here. Does the Animagus Undo spell have a lasting effect? This is a great question from Disney Dill. Does the Animagus Undo spell have a lasting effect, or would Wormtail technically be able to transform back into a rat at any time if he had a wand? I have no idea. Presumably, it is certainly possible that it could be a ward against Animagus magic. That is, it could prohibit Animagus magic, but it's also possible that it is just, yeah, it's just a Control-Z undo spell, right? It's just, no, actually, the spell. Maybe that's the incantation that they were casting as they wield their wands together. Black and Lupin counted it. 1, 2, 3. No, actually. And he transforms back. I guess it would be no, actually, in like, in Schoolboy Latin. But yes, yeah. Yes, no further information. To the best of my recollection, we get no further information on the Animagus Undo spell in the entire series. I don't recall ever getting, you know, a line from a Defense Against the Dark Arts, or even Minerva McGonagall, right? She'd be the perfect person in a Transfiguration class. Tell us a little bit about the Animagus, but no. Of course, Animagi are so very rare that it's understandable that they're not necessarily taught this as a core part of their studies. Okay, that is going to do it. I'm afraid that a couple of questions added. Okay, quick question from Princess Ostrich. Why or how did Peter Pettigrew end up with the Weasleys? Did I miss something, or can we just speculate? Maybe tactically, because Arthur gets news frequently from the Ministry. That was my speculation too, actually, Princess Ostrich. Yes, is that it is because of Arthur. That's yes. The Weasleys are a notable family, but not a conspicuous family. He's hiding from both sides, and the Weasleys, although they are involved in the conflict between with Voldemort, are not like, you know, frontline shock troops. There's a reason that he doesn't end up in the possession of Draco Malfoy, for example. He's kind of, yeah, he's hiding away. He's kind of out of the loop there. But the connection to Arthur does mean that he can eavesdrop on news from the Ministry. That was very much my take on it too. And Julia asks, where do Animagi put their wands when they're transformed? It's magic. I don't know. It's magic. That's it. I have no better answer to offer you there, Julia. That's going to do it, though, for this discussion, guys. Thank you all so much for joining me. As I say, 10 p.m. Eastern next Sunday. That's Sunday, October the 29th, this coming Sunday, for our last discussion of the novel version of Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. Then live tweets and movie discussions, and get in touch if you're interested in the roundtable or interview or, you know, whatever show structure we alight upon. Get in touch if you're interested in the discussion that I had right at the beginning of today's session. It has been an absolute pleasure talking to you all again. I will talk to you again soon. Until then, mischief managed.